Hey everyone, Lance from Topical Bible Studies here. I was looking at Luke chapter 9 and I was thinking some of you might be encouraged by this chapter the way I have been. In verses 12 through 17, we see a passage where Jesus feeds people, thousands of people, miraculously. And there's a lesson in that. And of course, if I were there and if I were these people who were in a desolate place who were hungry, I would follow Jesus wherever he went because he fed me miraculously. He took care of my hunger. But Jesus tells the disciples, those who are closest to him, that it's not about fish, it's not about bread. He says in verse 23, he was saying to them all, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake, he is the one who will save it. For what is a man profited if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will be ashamed of him when he comes in his glory and the glory of the Father and of the holy angels." In this passage, Jesus says that if anyone wants to come after him, we've got to take up our cross. Now, what is a cross? A lot of people, they wear a cross around their neck, and that's fine. Some people talk about burdens in life, and they say, well, I've got to pay my taxes, or I have an illness, and that's the cross I have to bear. But, when Jesus was saying these things, and we're not trying to minimize burdens in life, that's not what Jesus was talking about, though. What is the cross to Jesus? Well, we're going to look very carefully in a few verses what it really meant to him, but ultimately, what is the cross to Jesus? It's his death. It's the redemption of humankind. And so when he tells us that we too must take up our cross, it's the idea of being willing to die for him on a daily basis. And he says in verse 24, if we're going to save our life, we're going to lose it. But if we lose our life for his sake, then we will save it, because gaining him is more important than the entire world. Our soul is the most valuable possession we have. We've got to be willing to deny ourselves. Are you willing? Well, Jesus causes people or requires people to put it in action in verses 57 through and following. As they were going along the road, someone said to him, that is to Jesus, "I will follow you wherever you go." I've heard a lot of people say that to Jesus, but then when it comes to crunch time, they're not willing to follow through. Jesus said to this particular guy, "The foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." And he said to another, "Follow me." But he said, "Lord, permit me first to go and bury my father." But he said to him, "Allow the dead to bury their own dead. But as for you, go and proclaim everywhere the kingdom of God." Another also said, "I will follow you, Lord, but first permit me to say goodbye to those at home." But Jesus said to him, "No one, after putting his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God." These things that these people wanted to be involved in, having a home and taking care of dead family members, at least their bodies, and saying goodbye to those at home, we would say those are important things, but Jesus says, what's your priority? Are you willing to follow me no matter what, even if it means those other things will be lacking in your life? Being able to say goodbye to people, even being able to attend a funeral, or having your own place to stay. A lot of us would hesitate, wouldn't we? But Jesus says at the end of verse 62 that if you put your hand to the plow and look back, you're not fit for the kingdom of God. And this sounds like a pretty high and hard calling. Are we really willing to follow Jesus wherever he goes, even if it requires those tough things? We see in verse 51, when the days were approaching for his ascension, that is the idea of being lifted up on the cross, he was determined to go to Jerusalem. He was determined. Now look at this footnote real quick. It says that it could literally mean he set his face. Jesus was going toward Jerusalem, and he set his face toward Jerusalem. We see very quickly that Jesus is trying to provide an example of not looking back, because just a few verses later, he says, "No one, after putting his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God." Jesus provides the example of setting your face toward the goal. And his goal in that specific case was Jerusalem. Well, what's so important about Jerusalem? We see that the days of his ascension were approaching. Look carefully at verse 44. In fact, Jesus says, "Let these words sink into your ears. For the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men." If we were to look at this same thing in Matthew chapter 16, we would see Jesus saying that the Son of Man is going to Jerusalem. He'll be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes. He'll suffer many things, and he will be killed. Jesus knew what awaited him in Jerusalem, yet we see that he set his face toward that. This translation says that he was determined to go to Jerusalem. So, for those seeking Jesus for physical things, like those who were seeking the bread and the fish, well, in that case, they were fed and Jesus provided that for them. But for those who lingered on just to receive the fish and the bread, he would tell them in verses 23 and following that, look, if you're not willing to even deny your hunger, deny yourself, take up your cross, that is, be willing to die for him and follow him all the way, not looking back, you are not fit for the kingdom of God. And we say, but Lord, that's such a high calling. And he says, all you have to do is follow in my steps, because they will lead to the cross. Set your face toward the man who redeemed your soul.